You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
When a grieving widow is haunted by a mysterious woman in black who appears on her lawn whispering, "Today's the day," her sadness turns to terror. As the spectral figure draws closer with each passing night, Katherine must confront a century-old evil tied to a horrifying local legend. What begins as a nightmare soon becomes a fight for her children's souls, and the twisted truth behind the ghost may be darker than death itself. Love chilling tales that blur the line between the living and the dead? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for more terrifying stories that keep you up at night. New nightmares drop weekly. Are you brave enough to face them? Katherine Evers stood at the kitchen sink, staring out the window at the swaying fields beyond the farmhouse. It was late afternoon, and a pall of grey clouds hung low over the August sky. The golden wheat field that surrounded her home rustled in the wind, a restless sea of amber stalks. Normally, the sight had a calming effect, but now it only reminded her of how empty everything felt without David. A dish slipped from her trembling hands into the soapy water. Katherine barely noticed the splash, her mind far away. It had been 6 weeks since her husband's fatal car accident, 42 days of waking up to a cold, empty bed and silences that pressed on her ears. The farmhouse was too quiet now, deathly quiet, as if the walls themselves were mourning. No rumble of David's morning radio, no laughter of him chasing the kids down the hall. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator and the constant sigh of wind pushing through the eaves remained. She wiped her hands on a threadbare towel and glanced toward the living room where her children played. Julia, 12 years old, sat curled on the sofa with a book, her long brown hair falling like a curtain to hide her face. Max, only 6, was on the rug pushing a toy truck in slow circles. Too quiet, Katherine thought again. The kids had been subdued ever since the funeral. Julia barely spoke unless asked a question, and Max, once a little chatterbox, had become solemn and clingy. Katherine inhaled slowly, noticing the damp, earthy scent wafting through the open window. A summer storm was brewing. She could smell rain and distant ozone, like the air just before a lightning strike. The breeze carried a whisper of something familiar yet sorrowful, maybe wildflowers decaying by the roadside. It made her stomach turn unexpectedly. Grief did strange things to the senses. Even taste was affected. She realized she had a bitter metallic tang on her tongue, as if she'd been sucking a penny. Perhaps it was the onset of another anxiety attack. She closed the window with a soft thud, shutting out the moaning wind. "All right, you two," Katherine called gently, forcing cheerfulness into her voice that she didn't feel. "Time to wash up for dinner." Julia set her book aside without protest and helped Max to his feet. "I'm not very hungry," the girl murmured. Her voice was so soft that Katherine almost didn't hear it. "I know, sweetheart. Just a little, okay? I made your favourite, chicken and dumplings," Katherine replied. The mother managed a smile, though her insides felt knotted. Julia gave a tiny nod. Max shuffled over, rubbing an eye with one fist. "Did Daddy like chicken and dumplings too?" he asked quietly, looking up with wide, earnest eyes. The question was like a knife twisting in Katherine's chest. Her throat tightened, but she kept her composure for the children's sake. "He did," she answered softly, smoothing Max's rumpled hair. It felt fine and soft under her hand, comforting in its warmth. "He loved it. Let's eat some for him tonight, okay?" Max gave her a fragile smile and took her hand. Together, the small family moved to the dining table, illuminated under the yellow glow of a single hanging lamp. The bulbs cast a warm circle of light that pushed back the encroaching dusk seeping through the windows. Outside, the world was turning the colour of ash as the sun dipped behind the clouds. They ate mostly in silence. The only sounds were the clink of cutlery on porcelain and the soft chewing of dumplings. Katherine noticed every little noise. The scrape of Julia's fork, the gulp when Max swallowed milk, the ticking of the old clock above the mantel. Normally, one might find comfort in a quiet family meal, but this silence was heavy, laden with unspoken sorrow. Each tick of the clock sounded too loud, a stark reminder of David's absence at the head of the table. His chair remained empty, pushed in neatly, just as he'd left it that morning he never came home. Katherine forced a few bites down, but the food tasted like paste in her mouth. The dumplings sat on her tongue with a gluey texture, and she had to wash them down with water to avoid gagging. She watched Julia push carrots around her bowl. Max toyed with his bread, tearing off the crusts methodically. Nobody finished their meal. After dinner, Katherine cleared the dishes while the kids wandered into the living room again. Fat raindrops began pattering against the window pane, drawing her attention. It was fully dark now. The storm had arrived more quickly than she expected. She peered out and saw her reflection ghostly on the glass, a pale oval face framed by dark hair, eyes too large and haunted. She looked away, unsettled by her own appearance. Lightning flashed in the distance, brightening the entire yard for a split second. In that flash of white-blue light, something caught her eye at the far end of the front lawn, near the old oak tree. Katherine leaned closer to the window, pressing her palms against the cool glass. At first, she thought it was a trick of her grieving mind, a silhouette conjured from sorrow. But another flash followed, and the after-image burned into her vision. A figure stood out by the oak, black against the swaying golden grass. It looked like a woman. She was too far to see clearly, but Katherine could make out the long shape of a gown or dress fluttering in the wind. The woman stood unnaturally still, despite the gusts tugging at her clothes. Lightning forked again, and this time Katherine saw the face, or rather, the lack of one. The woman's features were obscured by a wide-brimmed black hat and what looked like a dark veil that hung down, concealing everything. Katherine's heart lurched against her ribcage. A stranger on the property at this hour, in this weather, dressed like that? Fear and bewilderment churned in her stomach. Had someone broken down on the road and come for help? But the road was a half-mile away down the dirt lane, and why would she be dressed in black, standing in the rain? She realized she was holding her breath only when her chest started burning. She exhaled shakily, fogging the glass, and swiped her sleeve across it to clear the view. The yard beyond was dark now as the lightning paused, rain slashing down in diagonal lines. The tree line at the edge of the lawn was nothing but a jagged silhouette against the night. Where did the woman go? Katherine squinted, pressing her forehead to the window. For a moment she saw nothing, only darkness, only the rain. Then another burst of lightning, and the figure was closer. Katherine gasped, stumbling back from the window. The woman in black now stood halfway up the field, maybe 50 yards from the house. It was impossible. She hadn't seen any movement between flashes, yet the woman had covered a great distance in mere seconds. Now Katherine could see her more clearly. She indeed wore a long black dress that billowed and snapped in the wind. A veil fluttered from the brim of her hat, and beneath it, something was off. The brief illumination of the storm revealed a glimpse of skin that was ashen grey, the angles of a jaw that seemed too sharp, and were those eyes peering out from behind the veil? Katherine couldn't tell, but she felt watched. Lightning flickered strobe quick, once, twice, and in those instants the figure seemed to twitch closer. Each flash found the woman in black several yards nearer, without ever appearing to take a step. Now she was at the old broken fence post at the edge of the yard, perhaps 40 yards away. Rain drenched the stranger's form, but she stood rigid and unaffected, arms at her sides. Her presence radiated malice, a cold, unnatural wrongness that Katherine felt in her marrow. All the hairs on Katherine's arms and neck stood up. Her mouth went dry, that metallic taste intensifying until she tasted copper. She backed further away, bumping the kitchen table. The chair legs squealed on the floor, a sudden noise that made her wince. In the silence between claps of thunder, a voice carried through the night. It cut through the rhythmic drumming of the rain with unnatural clarity. "Today's the day," said the woman in black. Katherine's breath caught in her throat. The voice was distant yet distinct, a wet, gurgling whisper, as if spoken through water or from underwater. She wasn't sure how she even heard it across the storm, but those 3 words pierced through the wind. Today's the day. Her mind swirled in confusion. The day for what? Who was this woman? The way she said it, almost gentle, almost regretful, yet dripping with ominous promise. Mom? Julia's voice behind her made Katherine yelp. She spun around, heart hammering, to find her daughter standing at the kitchen doorway. Julia's eyes were wide, reflecting the flicker of lightning. How much had she seen? Mom, what's wrong? Julia asked, her voice trembling. She had likely heard her mother's shocked gasp or the scraping chair. Katherine opened her mouth, uncertain what to say. She glanced back toward the window. Darkness again. The figure was no longer illuminated. But was the woman still out there, unseen in the rain? Katherine's pulse pounded in her ears. She felt an urge to grab her children and hide, but she forced herself to stay calm for Julia's sake. There's someone outside, Katherine managed to say in a low voice. She grabbed the flashlight that hung on a hook by the back door. Its metal body felt cold and solid in her shaking hand. Stay here, sweetie. Julia's face blanched. Outside? Who is it? I don't know. It might be someone who needs help. Just stay with your brother. I'll take a look. Even as she said it, part of her recoiled at the idea of going out there. But what choice did she have? If it was a lost traveller or neighbour in trouble, she couldn't just ignore them. Yet every instinct screamed that whoever or whatever was out there was not normal. Katherine crossed to the front door, her heart thudding so violently she felt dizzy. Thunder growled, and the lights flickered once, plunging the house into an instant of darkness before steadying. She felt Julia's small hand grip the back of her shirt. "Mom, don't," Julia whispered, fear plain in her voice. Katherine turned and knelt to face her daughter. She placed a hand on Julia's damp cheek. Julia had been crying, tears mingling with freckles on her cheeks, or was it just the rain-speckled window light playing tricks? Katherine hadn't even noticed. Guilt and love swelled in her chest. She had to be strong now. "It'll be okay," she murmured, hoping her voice didn't sound as hollow as she felt. "Lock the door behind me. If I'm not back in 2 minutes, you call 911, all right?" Julia hesitated, then nodded. Katherine took a steadying breath and unlocked the front door. The hinges creaked as she pushed it open. A burst of humid night air, smelling of wet grass and mud, swept in. Rain blew onto her face, cold pinpricks on her skin. She stepped onto the porch in her slippers, clutching the flashlight so tightly her knuckles were bloodless. Darkness cloaked the farm. The only light came in pulses from the sky, each lightning flash etching the barn, the lonely oak and the waving field into her vision. The thunder was nearly overhead now, a continuous rumble. Wind chimes under the porch eaves clattered a frantic, tuneless song. Katherine's toes were already soaked through her slippers from the rain sluicing across the porch boards. She shivered in her thin sweater. Squinting into the night, she clicked on the flashlight and swept its beam over the yard. The white beam danced over glistening grass and puddles forming in the dirt driveway. The oak tree's branches swayed like skeletal arms. No sign of the woman. "Hello?" Katherine called, her voice thin against the storm. "Is someone out here? Do you need help?" Only the wind answered, whipping a sheet of rain into her face. She wiped water from her eyes and took a step off the porch, the mud sucking at the soles of her slippers. The flashlight's beam trembled as her hand shook. She forced herself forward a few paces into the yard, the rain now drenching her hair and shoulders. She scanned around frantically, adrenaline making her lightheaded. Could she have imagined it? A product of exhaustion and grief? Katherine had suffered a few vivid nightmares since David died, hallucinations almost upon waking. Maybe this was another waking nightmare. Lightning flickered. For an instant, she thought she saw a shadow by the barn, but when she turned the flashlight there, it was only the sway of the barn's open door banging softly. "Hello?" she called again, louder this time, trying to sound authoritative despite her quivering insides. "This is private property. Are you hurt? Do you need me to call someone?" Nothing. The storm swallowed her words. Another rolling crack of thunder, so loud it rattled her teeth, made Katherine flinch. If the woman was out here, she either couldn't hear or didn't care, or she was hiding, watching. Katherine's skin crawled at that thought. She realized she felt exposed out here in the open, as if unseen eyes were tracking her from the darkness. The beam of the flashlight suddenly dimmed, flickered, died. The rain must have seeped in, or perhaps the battery had chosen this moment to give out. "Damn it," she swore under her breath. Now she stood in near total darkness, save for the occasional electric blue flash from above. Her breathing quickened. She needed to get back inside with the kids. This was folly. If someone was out here, let the police handle it. Why had she come out alone? Clutching the useless flashlight like a club, she turned and hurried back toward the porch. Each step in the sucking mud was an effort. Rain pelted the back of her neck. In her peripheral vision, she thought she glimpsed movement to her right, an outline darker than the night itself, sliding closer. A surge of primal fear urged her to run the last few yards. She splashed up the steps and onto the porch, lungs burning. Hands shaking, Katherine fumbled for the doorknob. Before she could reach it, the door yawned open from inside. Julia stood there, eyes huge and face pale in the warm light spilling from the foyer. She must have heard her mother's frantic steps. "I didn't see anyone," Katherine panted as she stumbled in, water puddling at her feet. Julia quickly shut and relocked the door. Max hovered in the hallway, clutching his stuffed dinosaur to his chest. His lower lip trembled. "You're all wet, Mommy," he said, voice quavering. "Is someone out there? I'm scared." Katherine dropped the dead flashlight on the side table and enveloped Max in a hug, rainwater soaking into the boy's pajamas. He felt small and warm, and she held him tightly, as much to comfort herself as him. "I'm okay. It's okay," she whispered, though her heart was still racing. Her words felt thin and false in the face of what she'd seen. She looked over Max's head to Julia, who watched her intently. Katherine forced a smile. "There was someone, but I think they left." Julia swallowed, then pointed to the window by the couch. "I saw her," she said in a brittle voice. "A lady. In a black dress, she was by the tree." So Julia had seen the figure too. Katherine's stomach clenched. This wasn't just her imagination, then. She opened her arms to Julia, and the girl ran into them. Katherine held both her children close. She could feel Julia's heart hammering as fiercely as her own. Max was beginning to sniffle, on the verge of tears. "It's all right," she soothed, stroking Julia's damp hair, then Max's. "It's probably just someone passing through who got caught in the storm." Even as she said it, she doubted her own words. What passerby moves like that, appears and disappears with the lightning? And that voice, "Today's the day." She did not mention the phrase to the kids. No need to scare them more. They stood like that for several minutes until the thunder moved further east and the rain died to a gentle patter. Finally, Katherine ushered them upstairs. "Let's get dry and into bed," she murmured. "It's late." "But the lady?" Max protested weakly. "She's gone, honey," Katherine assured him, though inside she wasn't sure of anything. "If she comes back, the doors are locked. No one is getting in tonight, okay?" She prayed she was telling the truth. After drying off and changing into fresh clothes, Katherine checked every door and window in the house twice. The farmhouse was old, but sturdy. The windows latched securely. The front and back doors each had deadbolts. She even dragged the heavy oak sideboard in the foyer a few inches, so it partially blocked the front door, just for her own peace of mind. Upstairs, she tucked Max in first. He insisted on a nightlight. Thankfully, the power had held despite the storm. She turned on the little plug-in light shaped like a rocket ship. A gentle blue glow filled the boy's room. Katherine bent to kiss his forehead. "Try to sleep, my love," she whispered. Max nodded and clutched his dinosaur tighter. "Will you stay up, Mommy, in case the lady comes back?" he asked in a small voice. "I'll be right in my room. I'll keep watch," Katherine promised. Her stomach twisted at making such a vow. How could she keep watch against something like that? But she kept her tone confident. "If she comes back, I'll hear and I'll chase her off." That seemed to reassure him a little. He closed his eyes, though his brows remained furrowed with worry. Katherine left his door open a crack and moved to Julia's room. Julia was already under her quilt, staring at the ceiling. The girl had changed into dry pajamas, but her hair was still slightly damp, fanned across the pillow. She looked lost in thought, far too serious for a 12-year-old. Katherine sat on the edge of her bed. "You okay?" she asked gently. Julia bit her lip, and for a moment she didn't answer. Then she turned her face toward her mother. There were tears in her eyes that hadn't fallen yet. "Who was that, Mom? Why was she here?" Katherine shook her head slowly. I don't know, sweetheart. I really don't. But I'm sure she's gone now. Maybe it was someone confused, or who needed help and then left. Julia's eyes searched her mother's face. She seemed to sense the lie, or at least the uncertainty. She looked at me, Julia whispered. When the lightning flashed, I saw her face, kind of. I think she was looking at me, Mom. It felt really weird, like bad. Katherine suppressed a shudder and laid a hand on Julia's shoulder. It's over now. I won't let anyone hurt you or Max. You know that, right? Julia nodded slowly. She reached up and grabbed her mother's hand, holding it tightly. Katherine felt how cold the girl's fingers were. She rubbed them between her own warm palms. I'm scared, Julia admitted in the tiniest voice, so softly it nearly broke Katherine's heart. Julia tried so hard to be brave since her father died, to help with Max, to not burden her mother with her own fear. Hearing her confess it now was both heartbreaking and a relief. I am too, Katherine whispered back before she could stop herself. The admission hung in the air. It felt dangerous to speak aloud, but also oddly cathartic. But we'll get through this. We will. She leaned down and kissed Julia's forehead, brushing away a strand of hair. Julia's skin was cool and smelled of the lavender shampoo she'd used. For a second, Katherine allowed herself to just breathe in that scent and be grateful that her children were here, safe and alive and with her. After losing David, she couldn't bear the thought of losing anyone else. Try to sleep, honey. I'll be up for a while. If you need me, I'm right next door. Are you going to call the police? Julia asked suddenly, propping herself up on one elbow. Katherine considered. She probably should. Report a trespasser on the property. But what would she say? There was a strange woman on my lawn who vanished into thin air. They'd think she was imagining things. Still, perhaps she could phrase it differently. I might, just to let them know we had an intruder. But I doubt they can do much unless she comes back, Katherine said carefully. Don't worry, though. I'll make sure someone knows. Julia accepted that with a yawn she tried to hide. Now that the adrenaline was wearing off, the poor girl was exhausted. Katherine urged her to lie down and pulled the blankets snug around her shoulders, cocooning her in warmth. Julia's eyelids were already drooping. Good night, baby, Katherine whispered. Night, Mom, Julia mumbled. Within seconds, she was already slipping into the depths of needed sleep, fear giving way to fatigue. Katherine left a small lamp on in the corner of Julia's room. She suspected her daughter wouldn't object tonight, even though normally Julia insisted on total darkness. Then she stepped out, leaving the door open a crack as well. She went downstairs and double-checked the locks yet again, peering out through the peephole into the dark front yard. The rain was nearly stopped. The night was black and still, the storm's fury replaced by an eerie calm. She listened hard and heard nothing but the distant chorus of crickets gingerly starting up again and the dripping of water from the eaves. No sign of the mysterious woman. Katherine realized she was drenched and shivering. Her socks and slippers were soaked through with muddy water. She quickly shed them, leaving a messy puddle on the mat. Water had soaked through her sweater to her skin, clammy and uncomfortable. She went upstairs to change into a dry shirt and pants. As she peeled off her wet clothes, she caught a whiff of something strange. Mixed with the scent of rain and mud on her jeans was another odor, a faint, cloying sweetness. It smelled like rotting fruit or decayed flowers. She sniffed her sleeve and recoiled. The odor was woven into the damp fabric. A wave of nausea rolled through her stomach. Was that from brushing past some plant outside? Perhaps some wild berries crushed underfoot, or was it from being near that woman? The thought that the woman might carry the smell of rot made her skin crawl anew. She bundled the wet clothes and tossed them into the hamper, then quickly pulled on fresh ones. Finally, she went to her own bedroom. The large farmhouse bed loomed invitingly, but she knew sleep would be elusive tonight. Instead, she went to the window that overlooked the front yard and parted the curtains. From here, she had a wide view of the fields and the long gravel drive leading to the main road. Silvery moonlight was starting to break through the thinning clouds, illuminating patches of the yard in an unearthly glow. The oak tree stood silent guard at the edge of the property, its leaves glistening. Everything seemed normal. Peaceful, even. As if the earlier terror had just been a bad dream. Yet Katherine's body still thrummed with tension, every muscle taut. She kept imagining she saw a shadow moving between the rows of cornstalks beyond the fence, or a figure standing just out of sight behind the oak. Every creak of the old house settling made her flinch. She forced herself to breathe slowly, in and out, like the therapist had taught her after David's death. Ground yourself in the present, she recalled. Name things you can see, things you can hear, things you can feel. Quietly, she spoke under her breath. I see the moon behind the clouds. I see the oak tree. I see the driveway glistening wet. I hear the clock ticking downstairs. I hear the wind in the grass. I hear my own breathing. I feel the carpet under my feet. I feel my ring on my finger. She absently twisted the gold wedding band on her left hand that she still couldn't bear to remove. Its familiar pressure grounded her a little. Her heartbeat was slowing down from its rabbit-like panic. Katherine sat in the chair by the window, resolute to watch for a while. Perhaps the intruder truly was gone, in which case she could eventually rest. If not, at least she'd be alert. Her thoughts wandered as she kept her eyes on the yard. Who could that woman have been? It didn't make any sense. She certainly didn't look like anyone from town. In their small community, everyone knew everyone, and Katherine couldn't imagine any local walking around dressed in funeral attire at night. And that voice, it had sounded barely human, yet she had heard it clearly despite the storm. Today's the day. The day for what? The phrase looped in her mind. The tone had been almost pitying, but with a cruel edge. Was it a threat? A warning? It reminded Katherine of the way someone might speak to a misbehaving child, chiding yet mocking. Eventually, exhaustion began to tug at Katherine's eyelids. The adrenaline crash left her limbs leaden. She checked the clock by her bed, nearly 1 a.m. The house was utterly still now. After sitting vigil by the window for over an hour with no sign of anything, she finally allowed herself to lie down. She kept the lamp on low and the curtains slightly open. As she pulled a quilt around herself, she realized how cold she was. Her feet felt like ice blocks, and a subtle tremor still ran through her body. Whether from the chill or lingering fear, she didn't know. Her last thought before sleep finally claimed her was of the woman's parting image, a black silhouette against lightning, creeping closer without moving her feet. Katherine dreamed of that shape through the rest of the night. A nightmare of a faceless woman slowly crossing an endless field, while Katherine stood paralyzed on the porch, unable to flee as the figure came nearer and nearer. Sunlight creeping through the curtains woke Katherine just after dawn. She sat up with a start, disoriented. In her groggy mind, she expected to see storm clouds and lightning, the woman in black still out in the field. But the early morning light was gentle and golden. Birds chirped normally outside. The nightmare of the previous night came rushing back in a sickening wave. Katherine hurried to check on the children. Max was still fast asleep, sprawled on his back with one arm clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Julia's bed was empty, but she quickly found her daughter in the kitchen downstairs pouring cereal with shaking hands. Julia nearly spilled the milk when she saw her mother enter. "Morning," Katherine said softly. She brushed a hand over Julia's hair. The girl gave a ghost of a smile. There were dark circles under her eyes. Clearly she hadn't slept well either. "Morning," Julia replied quietly. She hesitated, then asked, Did you see anything else last night, after I fell asleep?" Katherine shook her head. "No, nothing. It was quiet." She didn't mention her own restless vigil or nightmares. No need to worry Julia more. Max trudged into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Is the lady gone?" he asked drowsily, climbing onto a chair. "Yes, she's gone," Katherine assured him, hoping it was the truth. "It's a new day. How about we eat and maybe later we can do something fun inside, like a board game?" She didn't want them going outdoors, not yet. The kids nodded listlessly. Katherine poured herself coffee and sat with them, though she barely drank it. Her nerves were jittery enough without caffeine, but she needed the familiarity of the routine. The coffee's aroma was rich and normally comforting, but today it tasted acrid to her, like burnt rubber. She pushed the mug aside after a few sips. After breakfast, Katherine steeled herself and went out to inspect the front yard in daylight, leaving Julia and Max inside with the doors locked. The morning was deceptively beautiful. Last night's storm had rinsed the world clean. Raindrops sparkled on leaves and the grass glistened under the sun. The air was fresh, carrying the pleasant smells of wet hay and petrichor, the earthy scent of damp soil. But Katherine's stomach fluttered with apprehension as she approached the oak tree and the spot where the woman had stood. The ground was soft and muddy here. If someone had truly been standing in that spot, there should be footprints. Katherine scanned the area. At first, she saw nothing except her own shoe imprints from where she'd ventured out during the storm. But then, behind the fence post where the woman had stood during the lightning flashes, she found something. It wasn't a footprint exactly, but the grass and earth were disturbed, as though someone had been standing there for a long time, grinding the ground underfoot. The area was oddly marked, a perfect circle of flattened grass about 2 feet across, right where the woman had been. Katherine frowned and touched the ground. The soil inside the circle was oddly dry, unlike the muddy earth around it. In fact, it looked almost scorched. She leaned in and caught a faint whiff of that same sweet rot scent from her clothes last night. It made her gag and she covered her mouth. A shiver rippled up her spine. That patch of earth felt wrong. She stood and took a step back, her boots squelching in mud just outside the circle. The contrast was unmistakable, soaked ground versus that peculiar dry patch, like the rain had refused to touch that exact spot, or had evaporated unnaturally fast. Either possibility sent a wave of unease through her. Katherine forced herself to scan the rest of the yard. She followed what she thought might be the path the woman took. Though the woman never visibly walked, Katherine recalled her appearing closer and closer. Along that imaginary line, she discovered 2 more circular patches. One by the broken fence post, another about 20 yards from the house. Each was the same, perfectly circular, flattened vegetation, the soil in them dry and faintly foul-smelling. The final one she found was directly at the foot of the porch steps. Katherine's heart lurched as she saw it, a circle of dead, dry grass right below the bottom step, as if someone had stood there for a while. But she hadn't seen the woman come that close, unless it happened after the lights went out, or while she was inside. The thought that the woman in black light at her doorstep while she and the children huddled inside made her stomach twist violently. She stumbled backwards up the steps, suddenly feeling exposed out in the open yard again, and rushed inside, locking the door behind her. She pressed her back to the wood and took deep breaths, willing her racing heart to slow. "Mama?" Max's small voice drifted from the living room. She realized he and Julia were both watching her from the doorway, concern etched on their faces. She must have looked as shaken as she felt. "It's okay," she lied quickly. I didn't find anything. Maybe a deer or something passed through, that's all." She didn't want them worrying about the strange circles of death outside. She decided she had to call the police after all. Strange trespasser or not, there was something tangible to show now. Those circles. If nothing else, an officer might see them and take her seriously. Katherine ushered the kids upstairs, telling them to play quietly in their rooms for a bit. She didn't want them overhearing her call. Once she was sure they were settled, she picked up the phone in the kitchen and dialed the non-emergency line for the county sheriff's office. Sheriff Dalton answered after a couple of rings. He was an older man with a steady voice, someone David used to chat with occasionally at the feed store. Katherine explained haltingly about the intruder last night, a woman dressed in black wandering in the storm on her property. She omitted the ghostly details and the phrase the woman had spoken, simply stating that the person behaved oddly and disappeared before she could talk to her. She mentioned finding footprints, or rather, patches of evidence in the yard. Her voice shook despite trying to sound composed. "Could you send someone to take a look? I'm here alone with the kids, and it has us a bit spooked," she said, twisting the phone cord with her fingers. The sheriff was polite but sounded skeptical. "A woman in a black dress, at night in the storm? Did she say anything to you, Mrs. Evers?" Katherine swallowed. She said, today's the day." Hearing herself repeat it made her break out in goosebumps. It sounded absurd on her tongue, like the plot of a campfire tale. There was a pause on the line. "That's all? Just today's the day?" Dalton repeated, puzzled. "Yes, that's all. Then she was gone." "Well, "I'm not sure what to make of that," he admitted. "No one else has called in any sightings of strange folks wandering around. Could be a drifter or someone with dementia from the next town over." He was clearly grasping for a rational explanation. "I'll send Deputy Foster out to have a look around and file a report, all right? He can be there in about an hour." "Thank you," Katherine said, relieved that at least someone would come. While she waited, she paced the living room, tidying up compulsively to burn off her nerves. She picked up Max's toys, straightened the magazines on the coffee table, wiped an already clean counter. The act of cleaning offered a small sense of normalcy, even as her thoughts remained fixed on the circles outside and the memory of the woman's shape against the lightning. About an hour later, a patrol car rumbled up the gravel drive. Katherine went out to meet Deputy Foster, making sure to close the door behind her so the kids stayed in. The deputy was a tall, sandy-haired man in his 30s with a friendly face. He tipped his hat politely. "Morning, ma'am. Sheriff said you had an unexpected visitor last night?" "Yes," Katherine said. She realized she'd forgotten to comb her hair. The wind tuzzled a stray lock into her eyes as she spoke. "I'm sorry to bother you, but it really has us on edge. I have 2 kids, and with my husband gone, we just feel vulnerable." Foster's expression softened. "Of course, I understand. Why don't you show me where you saw this person and what you found?" She led him across the yard, pointing out the first circle under the oak. Up close in daylight, it looked even stranger. Ants or other insects were swarming around the edges, but none crawled into the circle itself, as if they sensed something toxic. Foster crouched down, frowning. He touched the soil and noted how dry it was. "That's peculiar," he muttered. "Almost like chemical runoff or something, but just in a small spot." He sniffed, then made a face. "Ugh, smells like something died here." Katherine nodded, hugging herself. The morning was warming up, but she felt a chill clinging to her. "I smelled it too, and there are more over here." She showed him the other 2 circles, including the one by the porch. Foster scratched his head. "I'll be honest, Mrs. Evers, I don't know what could cause this. Maybe some prank. You said the person you saw was a woman in a black dress?" "Yes, wearing a veil. I know it sounds odd. I couldn't see her face." Foster gave a slight chuckle. "Well, out here in the country we get some characters, but that's a new one to me. Could be someone from one of those historical reenactment groups wandering off-site." He was clearly still trying to rationalize. Katherine didn't respond to that. Historical reenactment? In a thunderstorm, miles from any park or event? It sounded as ridiculous as the ghostly alternative, frankly. Foster rubbed the back of his neck. "How about footprints or tracks? See any?" "No," Katherine said quietly. "No footprints, just these." He pursed his lips. "I'll report this to the sheriff. We'll keep an extra patrol car around the area the next few nights. Maybe we'll spot this mystery lady. In the meantime, make sure you keep everything locked. You got a firearm in the house?" Katherine hesitated. David had a hunting rifle and a shotgun, locked in the cabinet in the den. She hadn't touched them since his death. "We have a shotgun. I know how to use it just in case." David had taught her to shoot clay pigeons a few times. She wasn't a crack shot, but she could handle it if needed. "Good. I'm not saying you'll need it, but it doesn't hurt to be prepared out here alone." Foster gave her a reassuring smile. "Probably just some crackpot passing through. If she shows up again, give us a call right away. We'll come running." Katherine thanked him and watched as he drove off, feeling only mildly better. At least the police were aware now, but deep down she doubted their involvement would change anything. How could it, against something like that? Foster's inability to explain the circles only confirmed to Katherine that whatever they were dealing with wasn't normal. She spent the rest of the morning trying to keep busy. The children sensed her unease despite her attempts to hide it. Julia stayed close, helping with chores unprompted, drying dishes, folding laundry silently. Max was quieter than usual too, content to play with his dinosaur in the same room as his mother, rather than running off to cause mischief. Their subdued behaviour worried Katherine. They were just as afraid as she was, and that wasn't right. This home was supposed to be their haven, especially after losing their father. Now it felt tainted, unsafe. By lunchtime, grey clouds had begun gathering again, blotting out the sun. The forecast hadn't called for more rain, but the sky told a different story. Katherine made the children grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. The simple comfort food was one of the few things they all still enjoyed together. The aroma of butter and toasting bread filled the kitchen, a nostalgic smell that reminded Katherine of better times, snow days and sick days when David would cook this meal for them, joking it was the only thing he couldn't burn. The memory made her chest ache, but she forced a smile as she served the sandwiches. They ate at the kitchen table rather than the dining room, keeping close. This time the kids did eat, which relieved Katherine. She even managed half her sandwich, though her throat was tight. Outside, the wind picked up, causing a loose shutter to bang somewhere upstairs. Each time it did, she flinched. "We should play a game or something," Julia suggested quietly as she finished her soup, "to keep our minds off things." Katherine nodded. "That's a great idea. Why don't you pick one?" Julia chose Monopoly, an old set with missing pieces that they compensated for with pennies. They set it up in the living room. The familiarity of the game brought some life back into Max, who giggled when he bankrupted Katherine by landing on Boardwalk with a hotel. For a short while, the tension lifted as they argued about the rules and traded play money. Katherine treasured those moments of normalcy, fleeting as they were. The afternoon passed. The expected rain held off, though the sky remained an iron grey. By late afternoon, Katherine grew restless, eyes frequently flicking to the window. She realized she was waiting for sunset with dread, anticipating that the woman might return when darkness fell. Each time she caught herself checking the clock or peering out at the dimming light, she felt her stomach clench. The phrase kept echoing in her mind, "Today's the day." What did it mean? The deputy had asked if the woman said anything else. She hadn't. Was today, this very day, the day of something? Or was it just a general threat? Every time Katherine thought about it, her heart pounded anxiously. The not knowing was the worst part. As twilight approached, Julia and Max grew quiet again, as if all three of them sensed an unspoken shift. The game was put away. Katherine made a light dinner of canned beef stew, though none of them had much appetite after the late lunch. They ate mechanically, the air heavy with anticipation of nightfall. After dinner, Katherine decided to follow Deputy Foster's advice. She went to the den and opened the gun cabinet. The faint smell of gun oil and metal drifted out. David's shotgun, a sturdy 12-gauge, stood in the corner behind the rifles. Her hand shook a little as she took it out. It had been a while, but it felt familiar enough in her grip. She found the shells and loaded 2 into the chamber, then grabbed a handful more to put in her pocket. She prayed she wouldn't have to use it, especially not around the kids, but just holding it gave her a small measure of courage. "Mom?" Julia's voice came from behind. Katherine turned to see her daughter in the doorway, eyes wide at the sight of the weapon. "Are you really going to shoot her?" "I hope it doesn't come to that," Katherine said softly, "but I'm not going to let anyone hurt you or Max. If she tries to break in or harm us, I'll do whatever I have to." Julia nodded, looking simultaneously reassured and frightened by the idea. What if a gun won't stop her?" she whispered. Katherine didn't have an answer. The same thought had occurred to her. If this was truly something supernatural, would a gunshot do a thing? Probably not. But she pushed that thought aside and mustered a confident smile. "It's just a precaution. Why don't you take Max upstairs and start getting ready for bed? I'll be up soon." It was only 7 p.m., but she figured having the kids in their pajamas, teeth brushed, would save time later if things got chaotic again tonight. Julia obediently went to corral Max. Katherine made one more round of the house, ensuring every door and window was locked and drawing all the curtains tight. As she shut the last curtain in the living room, she peered out one final time at the darkening farm. Dusk blurred the edges of everything. The oak tree was just a hulking form against a sky of deepening blue and purple. She saw no silhouette of a woman, not yet. But the night was only just beginning. Upstairs she found Julia and Max in the bathroom, brushing their teeth together. Max was in his dinosaur print pajamas. Julia wore one of David's old T-shirts that she had adopted as a nightdress after he passed. It hung nearly to her knees. Seeing her in it made Katherine's heart squeeze, but also gave her resolve. David might not be here to protect them, so she had to double her strength for both parents. They decided all three would camp out in the master bedroom tonight, an idea Max was very excited about. "Like a sleepover," he said, bouncing a little. Katherine forced a chuckle and agreed, though she framed it as a special treat rather than admitting she just wanted to keep them close. By the time darkness truly fell, they were all settled in Katherine's big bed. The shotgun was propped within arm's reach against the nightstand. Katherine left a lamp on again, its warm light casting comforting golden tones around the room. Max snuggled against her on one side, already drowsy from the long day. Julia was on her other side, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Katherine gently stroked her hair, humming a soft lullaby she used to sing when the kids were toddlers. It was a wordless melody, something her mother had sung to her long ago. The tune filled the silence peacefully. Outside, the wind picked up again, making the old house creak. The loose shutter banged occasionally. They all tensed at each creak or thump, but after a while the regularity of these noises became almost lulling. Nothing unusual had happened yet tonight. Maybe, just maybe, the woman wouldn't return. Perhaps the terror was over. Katherine didn't dare voice that hope, but as 9 p.m. passed without incident, she felt some of the tightness in her chest ease. Max had fallen asleep, mouth slightly open, his little body rising and falling with each deep breath. Julia was fighting sleep, her eyelids drooping and snapping open. "It's okay," Katherine whispered. "You can sleep, Jules. I'll stay up a bit and listen." "Promise?" Julia mumbled. She was already half dreaming. "Promise." Katherine kissed her daughter's forehead. Julia gave a tiny nod and finally let her eyes stay closed. Soon, both children were asleep. Katherine carefully slid out from between them by propping pillows so that if they stirred, they'd still feel something there. She picked up the shotgun and moved to the chair by the window. Through a slit in the curtains, she could see the front yard and the pale gravel of the driveway catching some moonlight. Clouds were moving across the moon, making the light wax and wane. She waited, mind racing despite her exhaustion. Each minute that ticked by with nothing happening felt like a gift, and yet her nerves refused to settle. Her body was charged, every sense heightened. She felt like a deer in a meadow, ears perked for the snap of a twig, indicating a stalking predator. Just after 10 o'clock, as Katherine was starting to truly hope that maybe last night had been a one-time ordeal, she heard the creak. It was so soft at first she thought she imagined it. But then it came again, a slow, deliberate creak of wood from outside the bedroom door in the hallway. Katherine's fingers tightened on the shotgun. Her first thought was that Max or Julia had gotten up, but a quick glance showed them both still in bed. The hair on the back of her neck rose. The door to the bedroom was ajar about a foot. Through the gap she could see the dark hallway. Another creak, nearer now. Floorboards whining under weight. But it was not the sound of a child's light step. The rhythm was off, an unfamiliar cadence, as if someone were placing each foot with care, testing the floor. Inside the house. Katherine's mouth went dry. Her pulse throbbed in her throat. She stood slowly, quietly, and raised the shotgun. Could the woman have gotten in somehow? But every door was locked, every window sealed. Unless when she had gone outside with Deputy Foster, had she forgotten to lock the door behind her just then? She couldn't recall. Or perhaps a window? There was that loose shutter banging. Could it have jarred a window open? These thoughts flickered through her head in an instant. The creaking stopped. The house fell silent, as if holding its breath with her. Katherine took a step toward the door, heart hammering against her ribs. She gently rested the barrel of the shotgun against the door, and with her other hand pushed the door open another few inches, trying not to make a sound. The hallway was unlit except for a faint glow from the nightlight in Max's room down the hall. Shadows pooled in the corners. At first, Katherine saw nothing amiss. Then her eyes drifted to the end of the corridor, near the top of the stairs. There, standing in front of the window that overlooked the front yard, was a tall, dark silhouette. Katherine's breath seized. It was the woman in black. But now inside the house she appeared even more terrifying. Moonlight filtered through the window behind the figure, illuminating the edges of her form in silver. She wore the same long black gown, now dry and free of mud despite last night's rain, and the same hat with a drooping veil that covered her face. Her hands hung at her sides, fingers slightly splayed. Katherine saw with horror that water was dripping from the woman's fingertips, pattering onto the wooden floor. In the silence of the house, each drop was like a loud tick. Though the veil hid the woman's eyes, Katherine felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched, pinned in place by that unseen gaze. The air in the hallway had turned frigid. Katherine could see her own breath puff out in pale clouds. She realized the shotgun was trembling in her grip. Summoning every ounce of courage, Katherine stepped fully into the doorway, raising the gun. She tried to keep her voice low and steady so as not to wake the children, but her fear sharpened it. "Get out of my house," she hissed. "I'll shoot!" The woman in black cocked her head slightly at the sound. It was a slow, unnatural tilt, like a doll's head being gently moved. She took one step forward. The floorboard groaned loudly under her boot, and water pooled where she stepped, as if she'd just climbed out of a lake. With each step, the smell of stagnant pond water and decay wafted toward Katherine, growing stronger. It was the stench of a bog combined with the sweetness of rot, overwhelmingly foul. Katherine gagged, but held her stance. The woman advanced another step. Now she was at the top of the stairs, only perhaps 10 feet from where Katherine stood in the doorway of the bedroom. Still between them, the open mouth of the stairwell yawned to the first floor. The woman paused, her hidden face still pointed toward Katherine. Katherine's arms shook from fear and the weight of the shotgun. "I'm warning you," she said, louder this time, unable to keep the quaver from her voice. "Stay back!" The woman took one more step, her heeled boot clicking on the wood. Through the veil, something gleamed pale, maybe her skin or eyes catching the moonlight. Katherine didn't want to see it. She had to act. This thing was in the house with her children. Heart in her throat, Katherine pulled the trigger. The shotgun blast shattered the silence with a deafening boom. The recoil slammed the stock into Katherine's shoulder. She staggered back a step from the force. In the confined hallway, the sound was like an explosion. She heard glass behind the woman shatter as the buckshot sprayed past and hit the window at the end of the hall. But the woman in black remained exactly where she stood. Katherine blinked, ears ringing. How could she have missed at such close range? The woman was tall, impossible to not hit. Unless Katherine's mind struggled to process, the shot passed through her. There wasn't a mark on the figure. No blood. Nothing. In the muzzle flash, for the briefest moment, Katherine saw what was under that veil. She wished she hadn't. The woman's face was gaunt and chalky, skin stretched thin over bones, lips that were colourless and drawn back in what might have been a grin or a grimace. Katherine couldn't tell. Worst were the eyes, milky white and fixed right on her, dead eyes that nevertheless burned with intent. The veil dropped back down, obscuring the horror once more. The woman resumed moving as if nothing had happened. Another step. She reached up slowly and placed a gloved hand on the banister at the top of the stairs, as if to steady herself. The pose was eerily calm, like a genteel lady about to descend for tea, except for the fact that bullets seemed to mean nothing to her. From behind, Katherine heard a cry. Julia and Max had jolted awake at the gunshot. Max was wailing in confusion and terror. Julia sat up in bed, eyes huge as she took in the scene. Her mother in the doorway with the gun, and beyond, the sinister figure in black. "Mom," Julia screamed. The woman in black's head snapped toward the sound of Julia's voice. Without warning, she lunged forward, not down the stairs, but straight toward Katherine and the bedroom doorway, moving impossibly fast. The black figure closed the gap in an instant, gliding over the floor without her feet even seeming to touch it. Katherine had no time to think. On instinct, she slammed the bedroom door shut just as the woman reached it. The heavy wood panel hit something. Katherine felt the jolt. Then it bounced back slightly as if pushed. She threw her weight against it with a desperate grunt and managed to get it closed. Her hands scrambled for the lock. The old door had a simple turn lock. She twisted it just as a tremendous force struck the other side, causing the wood to crack and the whole door to shudder in its frame. Max was screaming now, a high-pitched, terrified sound. Julia rushed to him, pulling him off the bed and into a corner, away from the door. "Mom, what's happening?" she cried. Katherine couldn't answer. She pressed her back to the door, bracing it with her body as another heavy blow hit the other side. It felt like the woman was throwing her entire weight, or more than human strength, at it. The wood groaned, the hinges threatening to give. A slim gap opened between door and frame for a split second under the pressure, and through it a black-gloved hand snaked through. The fingers were abnormally long under the fabric, tipped with cracked, dirty nails that clawed at the air inches from Katherine's face. Katherine shrieked and shoved against the door with all her might, pinching the reaching arm with the closing crack. The arm writhed, and she heard for the first time a sound from the woman beyond the door, a hiss, like an angry snake or steam escaping a kettle. The sound slithered into Katherine's ear and coiled around her heart, pure malice and hunger in it. "Go away!" Katherine sobbed, tears of fear in her eyes. She yanked the shotgun, now single-loaded after firing one shot, and fumbled to cock it for the second barrel. Her fingers were clumsy and numb with terror, but she got it ready just as another blow almost tore the door open. The gloved hand managed to push through again, this time higher up, flailing blindly. Without hesitation, Katherine pressed the shotgun barrel to the gap and pulled the trigger again. The boom was muffled this time by the door. Splinters flew as the shot blasted through the wood. The arm recoiled with an inhuman speed, and there was a screech, an actual screech, not just a hiss, like nothing Katherine had heard before. It was like a woman's scream, but distorted and layered with a shrill insect-like chittering. The noise pierced her ears and rattled inside her skull. She cried out and covered her ears. Behind her she sensed the children cowering, their own hands over their ears as the horrible screech reverberated. Then suddenly there was silence. Katherine's breaths came in ragged gasps. She realized the impact on the door had stopped. The weight pressing against it was gone. She dared to ease off and peek through the splintered hole her shotgun had made. The hallway was empty. The moonlight at the end of the hall revealed nothing but the frame of the shattered window and fluttering curtains. There was a jagged hole in the glass where her first shot went wild. The floor, she noted faintly, was wet, covered in puddles that glistened, but no figure, no woman. Had she driven it off? Or was it hiding, waiting? "Mom?" Julia whimpered behind her. Katherine turned. Both children were huddled on the floor in the far corner, clutching each other. Max was trembling violently, tears streaming down his red face. Julia, though pale and frightened, was trying to put on a brave face for her brother. It broke Katherine's heart to see them like that. She forced a smile she didn't feel. "It's okay," she managed, voice shaking. I think she's gone." Max ran to Katherine, burying his face in her side. "Make her go way," he sobbed. "Don't let her get me." Katherine swallowed the lump in her throat and hugged him tightly with one arm, while still gripping the shotgun with the other hand. "I won't, baby. I won't let her touch you. I scared her off, you see. I shot her and she left." Julia stood on wobbly legs and approached as well, one hand pressed to her ear. "Mom, you're bleeding," she said shakily. Katherine blinked. In the chaos she hadn't noticed pain, but now she felt a stinging on her left cheek and ear. She touched her face and her fingers came away wet blood. A thin shard of wood from the door must have cut her when it splintered under the assault. It wasn't serious, just a superficial slice, but Julia's eyes filled with fresh tears seeing her mother hurt. "It's nothing," Katherine assured, wiping the blood on her shirt. "They're just a scratch." Julia sniffled and nodded. Her eyes drifted to the door. Is she really gone? Katherine didn't know. The stillness in the hall was eerie. She didn't trust it. "For now," she answered. "But we're not staying here to find out. We need to leave the house." Truth was, Katherine had no idea where they could go in the dead of night in this rural area. The neighbours were far, and she wasn't sure if that thing wouldn't just follow them outside. But the thought of remaining inside these walls one more minute, waiting for the woman to find another way in, was unbearable. "We're going to the car," she decided aloud, trying to sound confident. "We'll drive into town, maybe find a motel or go to the sheriff's station. We just need to get away right now." Julia nodded rapidly, relief on her face at the notion of leaving. Katherine quickly went into survival mode. She grabbed sneakers for each of them from the closet, and they hastily put them on with trembling hands. Max was still hiccuping sobs, but he understood enough to shove his little feet into his light-up Spider-Man sneakers without protest. Katherine snagged a hoodie and put it over his pyjamas, zipping it up. Julia threw on a flannel shirt over her nightdress. Katherine cracked open the door carefully, shotgun ready. The hallway stretched before them, empty. The wet footprints, or rather puddles, led from the broken window at the end of the hall to the door, then back a few feet, and simply stopped in the middle of the corridor. A few feet shy of the staircase, it was as if the intruder had evaporated. Water and muck stained the wood where she'd stood, but no sign of her now. The stench of stagnant water still hung in the air, though less overpowering. Moving swiftly, Katherine ushered the children down the stairs. Every shadowed corner made her heart leap, expecting the woman to lunge out, but nothing happened. The first floor was dark and silent, save for the ticking of the clock in the living room and the faint buzz of the refrigerator. Everything looked normal and undisturbed, a mockery of the violence that had just occurred upstairs. At the front door, Katherine paused. The deadbolt was still in place. How had the woman gotten in? Katherine quickly peeked into the kitchen. Windows intact. The back door locked. Then she remembered the shattered window upstairs. Perhaps the entity had entered through the wall or window somehow without opening it physically. Or maybe she was there all along, hiding inside the house. That thought was even more chilling. Had the ghost been lurking in some dark corner all day? No time to dwell on it. Katherine unbolted the front door. The night outside was cool and breezy. The earlier clouds had cleared, leaving a three-quarter moon shining over the fields. It was a serene night, cricket song floating in. The calm was at stark odds with the fear clawing at Katherine's insides. She, Julia, and Max rushed to the car, a blue SUV parked on the gravel drive beside the house. Katherine practically threw the kids into the back seat and slammed the doors. She jumped into the driver's seat, tossing the shotgun onto the passenger side. With shaking fingers, she rammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine sputtered, but did not start. "No, no, please," Katherine begged under her breath. The engine clicked rapidly, a terrible sound of a vehicle failing to turn over. She tried again, pumping the gas. It whined but wouldn't catch. Her adrenaline-soaked mind struggled to understand. Had the woman done something to the car? Or had Katherine simply neglected it? It had worked fine earlier this week. Julia leaned forward from the back. "Mom?" Katherine forced calmness into her voice she didn't feel. "It's okay," probably flooded it. She tried once more. The engine roared to life this time, making them all jump. "Thank God," she whispered. She threw the car into reverse and backed down the driveway recklessly, the wheels spitting gravel. The headlights carved twin beams through the night, illuminating the dirt road that led towards town. As they swung away from the house, Katherine involuntarily glanced in the rearview mirror at the farmhouse receding behind them. In the red glow of the taillights, she thought she saw a flicker of movement on the front porch, a tall silhouette, and a glint like eyes reflecting light. But then they rounded the bend behind a cluster of trees, and the house was out of sight. Katherine pressed the accelerator hard. The SUV's engine strained as it bumped along the pitted country lane. Max was whimpering softly, and Julia reached over to hold his hand, trying to soothe him, even as her own teeth chattered with nerves. They sped through the night, leaving their home behind. Katherine's hands were tight on the wheel, knuckles white. She kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that phantom woman lurching after them down the road, or worse, sitting in the back seat. But the only things visible were the dust kicked up by their wheels and darkness. The nearest town, Briar Glen, was a 15-minute drive down the highway. That felt far too long. Katherine's mind raced. Who to go to at this late hour? The sheriff's station might not be staffed fully at night, just a dispatcher and maybe one deputy. She considered heading straight there regardless, but another thought took precedence. Her friend Candace lived on the outskirts of town, just off this road. Candace and her husband Roy, they'd been good friends to Katherine and David, and Candace had been especially supportive after the accident. They had a small house and no children. Maybe they'd let her and the kids crash for the remainder of the night and sort things out in the morning. She picked up her phone, a miracle, she had remembered it, and with one hand on the wheel used voice dial to call Candace. It rang several times, and Katherine's heart sank, thinking she might not wake. But then a groggy voice answered, Hello? Candace, Katherine gasped in relief. It's me, Katherine. Katherine, it's nearly midnight. What's wrong? Concern sharpened her friend's tone. I need help. We had an intruder or something. I grabbed the kids and left the house. Her words tumbled out. We're okay, but I didn't know where else to go. Can we come to your place? Just for tonight? Oh my God, of course. Are you hurt? Did you call the police? Candace sounded fully awake now, alarmed. I did call earlier, but it came back. I'll explain when I get there. I'm on Brookside Road now, just a few minutes away. All right, I'll unlock the door and wake Roy. Drive safe. Hurry. Katherine hung up and exhaled shakily. Candace's voice had provided a dose of comfort. She felt safer just knowing she was expected. Within 5 minutes, Katherine turned onto the paved driveway of a cosy single-story house nestled behind some maple trees. Lights were on in the front windows. Candace was already outside, robe thrown over her pyjamas, waving anxiously as Katherine pulled up. The moment Katherine parked, Candace hurried to open the car door. Katherine practically fell into her arms as she got out, her composure cracking now that they were safe. Candace held her tightly. She was a petite woman, but strong when she needed to be. I've got you, she murmured. You're safe here. Roy appeared behind her, looking concerned and holding a baseball bat, as if ready to fend off whoever had chased her friend. He gently helped unbuckle Max, who had calmed to quiet sobs, and lifted the boy into his arms. Julia stumbled out on her own and clung to Candace's free hand. Inside the house, the warmth and normalcy of the living room was both jarring and comforting. The TV was on low, showing a late-night infomercial, likely what they'd been half-watching before bed. A half-finished cup of chamomile tea sat on the coffee table. The familiar smell of Candace's vanilla plug-in air fresheners was a strange contrast to the scent of gunpowder and damp that clung to Katherine's clothes. They all sat down on the plush sofa. Candace grabbed a throw blanket and wrapped it around Julia and Max, who huddled together, exhausted and scared. Roy offered them water. Julia sipped, but Max refused to let go of Katherine, so Roy held the glass for her as she drank a bit. Her throat was raw from screaming. Candace rubbed Katherine's back gently. "Tell us what happened," she said softly. Katherine took a deep, shuddering breath. She recounted the night's events, the second appearance of the woman in black, how she somehow got inside the house, the impossible way she withstood gunshots, and the attack at the bedroom door. As she spoke, she realized how insane it all sounded. She kept expecting Candace and Roy to exchange looks of disbelief, but they listened attentively, growing more appalled and horrified. Candace's hand never left Katherine's back, a steadying presence. Roy had his arm protectively around Max, who had gone quiet again, sucking his thumb, a habit he'd dropped years ago but reverted to under duress. When Katherine finished, Candace looked at her with eyes wide. "Jesus, Katherine. I don't even know what to say. That's beyond a regular intruder." Roy nodded. "I've heard some weird stories out here, but nothing like that." He glanced at the children and added quickly, "Whoever or whatever it was, good thing you got out. You all can stay here as long as you need. We'll figure this out in daylight." Katherine felt tears of gratitude welling up. "Thank you. I'm sorry to barge in so late. Candace squeezed her hand. "Don't even apologize. I'm just glad you're safe. Did you get hurt? What about the kids?" She noticed the dried blood on Katherine's cheek. "It's just a scratch from the door, I think. The kids are okay, just scared out of their wits." Katherine brushed Julia's hair as her daughter leaned against her. Julia managed a weak smile for Candace, who gave her a reassuring pat. "I'm going to call the sheriff's office," Roy said. "They should send someone out to check your place." Katherine nodded. Now that they were out, she definitely wanted the cops to go, even if she doubted what they'd find. "Deputy Foster came this morning and saw the evidence in the yard. I'm sure they'll head out once they hear what happened." Roy stepped aside to make the call, speaking in a low tone into his cell. Candace got up to fetch more pillows and set up the guest room, but Katherine tugged her arm. Can we just stay together for now? I don't really want to be alone in a room yet." She was embarrassed by how frightened she sounded. Candace immediately sat back down. "Of course, you can all sleep right here in the living room if you want, whatever makes you comfortable." Katherine nodded appreciatively. She actually felt safer in this central, well-lit area with everyone nearby, rather than separated in different rooms. Roy returned. "Sheriff Dalton's sending Foster and another deputy out to your farm. They also said if you're up to it, you could come down to the station to make a statement tonight, but it's not urgent. They have a patrol car to swing by here too, to check on you." "Thank you," Katherine exhaled, relief mixing with lingering anxiety. "I don't think I can go back there tonight, even with police." "Don't worry about that now," Candace said firmly. "We'll go tomorrow with a priest and an army if we have to, but not tonight." Katherine let out a shaky laugh, feeling some tension break at her friend's protective humour. She looked at her kids, who were wilting with fatigue. Max could barely keep his eyes open. Julia was nodding off against Katherine's shoulder. Their trust in her, that she would keep them safe, was absolute. She hoped she was truly worthy of it, after all that happened. Candace helped arrange a more comfortable sleeping situation. They laid the children down on the big sofa with pillows and the throw blanket. Max was asleep again almost instantly once he curled up, holding Julia's hand. Julia fought sleep, eyes on her mom, until Katherine sat next to her and hummed that lullaby again softly. Soon, exhaustion claimed Julia as well. The two women and Roy sat quietly for a moment in the dim room, the only sound the low murmur of the TV and the crickets outside. Roy shook his head, still absorbing the fantastic tale. "I don't think you're crazy, but damn, that's a lot to take in." "I know how it sounds," Katherine sighed. "I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't." She paused, eyes drifting to a picture on Candace's wall of a saint, a decorative cross beside it. "You have a crucifix?" she asked abruptly. Candace followed her gaze. "Oh, yeah. Roy's mom gave us that." "Why?" Katherine swallowed. "When I was pushing on the door, I was praying, just saying anything to make it stop. I don't even remember what, but I recall promising God I'd do anything if he helped me save my kids. It's silly, but maybe faith." Candace gave a small smile. "It's not silly. Do you want to borrow that cross? You can hold it if it makes you feel better." Katherine nodded. Candace retrieved the cross, a simple wooden one, and handed it to Katherine. It felt solid and reassuring in her hand, even if only symbolically. Growing up, Katherine had gone to church often, but hadn't been in years, not since the kids were little. But now, in the face of something seemingly demonic, she found herself reaching for anything holy instinctively. They decided to rest rather than dwell further that night. Roy offered to stay up and keep watch, but he had to be at work early, though Katherine doubted he would actually leave them. Katherine insisted she was okay enough to let him and Candace get some sleep in their bedroom. She'd keep watch in the living room for a while. In truth, she wasn't sure she could sleep without nightmares. Candace reluctantly agreed, but only if Katherine promised to wake them if she needed anything at all. She gave a lingering hug, and then she and Roy headed to their room, leaving the door ajar. Katherine sat in an armchair near the sofa. She turned the TV volume down to a near-inaudible murmur, just for a little light and semblance of normalcy. Some late-night talk show was on now, the host's monologue playing out to an unseen audience. The mundane humour was oddly soothing in contrast to the horror she'd endured. She clutched the wooden cross in one hand and her phone in the other, debating texting her late husband's sister about the craziness, but decided against it for now. Too much to explain. As the adrenaline slowly ebbed, she realised how bone-tired she was. Her muscles ached from the tension and exertion. Her eyelids drooped despite her efforts to stay vigilant. The soft couch where her children slept looked very inviting. Maybe she could close her eyes for just a few minutes. Katherine rested her head back against the armchair and allowed her eyes to shut. Just a short rest, she told herself. Safe, they were safe here. In her half-doze, images from the night replayed in snatches, the woman's milky eyes, the terrible screech, the water dripping from her hands. Katherine twitched awake slightly, then sunk into a different dream. She saw David, her husband, standing on the front lawn in bright daylight. He was waving, smiling as if nothing was wrong, as if he hadn't died. She ran to him in the dream, heart soaring, and then his face changed, melting into a pale, grinning skull under a black veil. "Today's the day," he rasped in the woman's gurgling voice, and his skeletal hands grabbed her shoulders. Katherine jolted awake with a cry, heart hammering. It took her a second to remember where she was. The living room. Candace's house. Safe. Julia and Max were still asleep, unaware of her outburst. She sucked in a breath, wiping sweat from her brow. She realized she'd slept for perhaps a half hour. The TV was now showing some old sitcom rerun. Everything was peaceful, but something felt off. She sat up, clutching the cross. The cricket song outside had gone silent. The night felt still, expectant. A sudden knock at the door made Katherine flinch violently. It wasn't loud, just a single tap or thud. For a moment she wondered if she imagined it. She waited, blood rushing in her ears. Another knock, slightly louder. Who could that be at nearly 1 a.m? The deputies? Possibly, but they'd likely use a cruiser's lights or call out. Candace's dog, an old lab, usually barked at any visitor, but he was silent. Maybe he was shut in their room. This quiet knocking was unnerving. Katherine stood, heart beginning to pound again. She went to the front window and carefully peeked through the curtain. On the porch, illuminated by the yellow bug light, stood a lone figure. A woman, wearing a black dress and a wide-brimmed hat. Katherine's throat seized in pure terror. No, how? How had she followed them here? The farm was miles away. This wasn't possible. Perhaps she was still dreaming? She blinked hard, but the figure remained. The woman in black stood at Candace's door, perfectly still except for one arm slowly raising. She knocked again, 3 polite raps this time, as if she were an acquaintance dropping by. Katherine stumbled back from the window, nearly hyperventilating. A cold sweat broke over her skin. She glanced to the kids, still asleep, thank God. What to do? If she woke Candace and Roy, but what could they do? A bat and belief might not stop a ghost that shrugged off gunfire. The door had a chain latch. At the very least, she must ensure it was on. She crept to the door, trying to be silent, and pressed her weight against it. She gently tested the knob. It was unlocked. Candace had left it open for Katherine to come in. Cursing under her breath, Katherine turned the deadbolt with trembling fingers. Just as she slid the chain latch into place, a voice came from the other side of the door. Katherine. It spoke her name. The voice was muffled through the wood, but unmistakable, a hollow, echoing version of a woman's voice, somehow simultaneously a whisper and a shout. It was the first time Katherine had heard it say anything other than that ominous phrase. Hearing her own name from those lips nearly undid her. She backed away, clutching the cross to her chest now. The crucifix. Would it even do anything? She thought of movies where brandishing the cross repels the evil. Did she dare open the door and try? No, that was folly. Katherine, the voice came again, almost sing-song, mocking. I see you. A scrape of nails on the door followed, a slow scraping like claws on metal, though it was just wood. The sound made Katherine want to crawl out of her skin. At that moment, a new sound cut through the terror, the distant wail of a siren. Red and blue lights flickered down the road, the deputy's car approaching. The siren wasn't on full blast, likely to not wake the whole neighborhood, but it was coming closer. The knocking ceased. There was a sudden heavy thud against the door that rattled it in its frame. One attempt at forcing it, perhaps, but the chain and bolt held. Then silence. Katherine risked a peek through the curtain again. The porch was empty. The woman was gone. A wet footprint remained on the concrete step, but even as Katherine watched, it steamed and evaporated as though it were boiling away, leaving only a dark stain. Headlights swept into the driveway. Katherine sagged in relief as she saw Deputy Foster step out, his flashlight beam cutting across the yard. She rushed to unlock the door and nearly collided with Candace, who burst out of the bedroom, Roy right behind. Obviously the knocking and possibly Katherine's voice had woken them. "What was that?" Candace hissed, eyes wide. Was someone here? Katherine just nodded rapidly and pulled the door open to greet the deputy. Foster looked surprised to see her so frantic. Candace's front door opened right into the living room, and he could see the frightened group behind her. "She followed us," Katherine blurted out at him, voice shaking. "The woman, she was here." Deputy Foster's face went from confusion to determination. He unclipped his sidearm. "Inside the house?" "No, on the porch. She just left when you came." He gave her a dubious look but didn't comment. He stepped back and shone his flashlight around the yard, then motioned to someone, another deputy likely still in the car, to circle around back. After a minute of tense waiting, they found no sign of any person nearby. Foster spoke quietly into his radio, then returned to the doorway. "No one around now," he said, "but I saw something odd." He pointed his flashlight to the step. "Is that blood?" Katherine and Candace both leaned out to look. On the step where the puddle had been was a reddish residue in a roughly circular shape. It looked almost like rust or blood that had been diluted. Katherine shuddered. "I'm not sure," she replied honestly. She knocked on the door. She said my name." Foster's eyes narrowed. "She spoke to you this time?" Katherine realized how crazy this all must sound to him, but there was no going back now. "Yes, Deputy, this is exactly what I was afraid of. She's not normal. I shot her twice and she didn't even flinch. She left weird marks around. She followed us here from the farm. I know you probably think I'm—" Foster held up a hand. "I don't know what to think, ma'am. But I do see that something strange is going on. Let's do this. I'll park outside here the rest of the night. In the morning, Sheriff Dalton and maybe a state investigator can come take a full report. For now, you try to rest." He glanced at Candace and Roy. "We'll keep an eye out. If this lady comes back, we'll see her." Candace thanked him and closed the door. She looked at Katherine with disbelief and worry. "She really followed you here?" Katherine nodded miserably. "I'm so sorry. I didn't think—" "Hey, none of that." Roy put a hand on her shoulder. "This thing, whatever it is to blame, not you. We'll get to the bottom of it. At least the police are taking it seriously now." Candace checked on the kids, who miraculously had slept through the knocking and commotion. Likely sheer exhaustion kept them out. Candace then firmly guided Katherine back to the sofa. "Try to sleep a little. That cop isn't going to let anything happen." Katherine, clutching her cross, finally agreed to lay down on the couch between her children. Feeling their warmth nestled beside her provided a reassurance she desperately needed. Candace draped another blanket over them. Though it took a long while for her racing heart to calm, eventually the presence of the deputy outside and her friends nearby allowed Katherine to drift into a shallow, troubled sleep. Her dreams were fragmented. She heard the phrase, "Today's the day," repeating over and over like a twisted mantra, echoing in her husband's voice, her own voice, the voice of the woman in black. She dreamed of standing at a grave that bore no name, only that phrase etched in stone. And all around her were dead flowers and the soft sound of someone weeping behind her, which when she turned into that ragged whisper of a laugh. Morning light brought little comfort. By 7 a.m., the household was stirring. Katherine woke bleary-eyed on the couch with both children still curled into her sides. For a moment, the sunny beams through the window made her think perhaps it was Saturday morning, that David might be downstairs making pancakes, that everything in the last 2 days had been just a horrible dream. But the stiffness in her limbs and the dryness in her throat told her it was real. The shotgun leaning against the wall and the deputy's cruiser still parked outside confirmed it beyond doubt. Candace was already up, brewing coffee in the kitchen and talking quietly with Deputy Foster, who had remained on watch. The tired-looking officer had dark circles under his eyes and was finishing a report on his notepad. When Katherine gently extricated herself from her sleeping children and joined them, he gave a polite nod. "Morning, ma'am. Hope you got some rest. The sheriff and another deputy went to check your property at first light. They'll come by here after." Katherine rubbed her face. "Thank you for staying. Did you see anything else?" Foster shook his head. "Quiet night after that incident. Nothing moving out there except a couple of deer." He hesitated, then ventured, "We searched the yard and area around your friend's house too. No signs, just that weird residue on the porch." Candace handed Katherine a mug of coffee, adding sugar the way she knew her friend liked. Katherine took it gratefully, wrapping her cold hands around the warm cup. She realized she was still shivering slightly, whether from nerves or the morning chill. "I don't know how to fight this, Deputy," Katherine admitted softly. "It's not just a person. I think it's something else." Foster cleared his throat, lowering his voice. "Off the record, Mrs. Evers, I'm starting to think so too. We've had a few odd calls over the years, people seeing things out by Blackwood Pond or near Old Ward Estate, but nothing like this. Usually just stories to scare kids." The mention of a pond and a name perked Katherine's attention. "Blackwood Pond? Ward Estate?" Candace, who had sat down at the kitchen table, looked up. "I was doing some digging online early this morning, after she showed up here. There's not much, but I found references to a local ghost story. It's not well documented, more like something on a folklore forum and some old newspaper snippet." She flipped open her laptop, which sat on the table. "Look at this." Katherine and Deputy Foster leaned over. On the screen was a scanned newspaper clipping from 1908, the edges of the page dark and water-stained. The headline read, "Tragedy at Blackwood Farm, Mother Drowns Children, Takes Own Life." Katherine felt a chill reading those words. Today's the day, the exact phrase, and the scenario, widowed mother, 2 children, drowning. Her breakfast threatened to come up. She set the coffee down. It was as if history's nightmare was reaching out claws to drag her and her kids into it. Candace scrolled. There's more. Locals called Blackwood Pond Wailing Woman Pond after that. Over the years, people claimed to hear cries or see a lady in a black gown near that water. But the farm was abandoned eventually, and the pond partly drained. Your farmhouse is a few miles from that site, right? She looked to Katherine. Katherine nodded numbly. Our property used to be part of a larger estate long ago. David mentioned something about it being parcelled off decades back. We don't have a pond, but there's a dry creek bed and some marshy lowlands on the edge by the woods. Maybe that was it once. She glanced at Foster. The deputy looked astonished. I've heard ghost stories, of course. Never thought they could be real. He tapped the computer image. So you're thinking this Eliza Ward is what's been harassing you? Everything fits, Candace said. She lost her husband and went mad, killed her own kids. Now this ghost sees another widow with kids about the same ages. Maybe it triggered something. Katherine's mind reeled. She felt a strange mix of sorrow and revulsion. Sorrow for the poor woman's state of mind, but horror at what she'd done and what her spirit was trying to replicate. She wants to kill us, Katherine said quietly, or make me do what she did. Deputy Foster frowned deeply. Whatever she wants, we can't let that happen. Sheriff Dalton might not fully buy the ghost angle, but he's concerned enough after what we've told him. He's calling in a local priest to come bless the place, just in case. Candace gripped Katherine's hand. If this is her, maybe there's a way to stop it. Sometimes in ghost stories, putting the spirit to rest, or confronting it at the source. Maybe at the pond. Katherine recalled how the ghost dripped water and left puddles. It was tied to that drowning. Perhaps the pond was indeed the key. I want to go back, she said suddenly, to the farm, to end this if I can. Foster looked concerned. Are you sure that's safe? Katherine's jaw set in determination. Nowhere seems safe. She followed me here. She attacked my children. I can't just hide in someone else's house forever. If Eliza Ward's spirit is after us, I need to face her. Maybe at the place it all began. Maybe she's tied to that land, that pond. Candace squeezed her hand harder. You're not going alone. Katherine managed a faint smile at her friend. You don't have to. I'm coming, Candace insisted. Roy too when he gets back. Her husband had stepped out at dawn to grab donuts and to inform his boss he wouldn't be into work that day due to a family emergency. I'll go as well, Foster said. Sheriff might not love it, but I'm already in this and I saw enough to believe you. I'm not leaving you alone out there. Katherine was flooded with gratitude. She blinked back tears. Thank you. Just then, the children wandered into the kitchen. Julia looked unkempt and wary, but relieved to see her mom. Max clung to his sister's hand. Mama, can we go home now? He asked innocently. Katherine knelt down and hugged them both. We will, sweetie, soon. But first, Mommy needs to take care of something. Okay? You'll stay here with Aunt Candace and Uncle Roy for a little while. Max started to protest. He didn't want to leave her side, but Julia shushed him gently. She seemed to understand more. Be careful, Mom, Julia whispered, eyes pleading. Katherine kissed her forehead. I will, I promise. I'm going to make sure that woman never bothers us again. They got prepared swiftly. Candace changed into outdoor clothes, jeans, boots, a sturdy jacket. Katherine borrowed some of Candace's clothes too, since she'd fled home in pyjamas. She found herself wearing an old flannel shirt that had once belonged to Candace's father, which oddly made her feel protected, like a fatherly hug. She also accepted a small crucifix necklace from Candace, who took it off her own neck to give. Katherine hung it around her throat. fingers brushing the cool metal. Deputy Foster checked his pistol and brought along a shotgun of his own from the patrol car, loading it with fresh shells. "Don't know if these do much against ghosts," he said with a wry smile, "but it made me feel better last night." Roy returned, alarmed at the plan but supportive. He agreed to stay behind with the kids to keep them safe at his house, just in case. For extra measure, he said he'd keep a rifle handy, and the deputy's colleague would continue to patrol the vicinity. Julia reluctantly let go of her mother, and Max tearfully allowed himself to be distracted by the promise of a chocolate donut with sprinkles. By 8:30 a.m, Katherine, Candice, and Deputy Foster set out in the police cruiser toward Katherine's farm. The day was turning overcast again, the sun a pale disk behind a veil of clouds. A humid breeze blew across the fields, rustling roadside weeds. The summer lushness around them felt at odds with the cold dread in Katherine's stomach. She sat in the back of the cruiser, Candice beside her. The deputy had insisted she and her friend not drive themselves. As they turned onto the dirt lane leading to the farmhouse, Katherine's breath caught. The house came into view, her home, now bearing scars of the previous night's battle. The upstairs window at the end of the hall was shattered, and even from a distance she could see the splintered front door, still ajar from their exit. The sheriff's vehicle was parked in the yard. Sheriff Dalton, a stocky man with salt and pepper hair, stood on the porch talking with a second deputy and a tall, thin man in a clergy collar, the priest, presumably. They all turned as the cruiser rolled up and stopped. Katherine stepped out, feeling strangely self-conscious about the damage to her own home, as if it were her fault. The sheriff approached. "Mrs. Evers, I'm glad you're all right. We've secured the place, though I'm not exactly sure what we're securing it from." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Katherine noticed the priest quietly observing her. He had gentle eyes and held a Bible. "I know how it sounds, Sheriff," Katherine said, "but I think I know what we're dealing with. There's an old pond or marsh at the back of the property, right?" Sheriff Dalton nodded slowly. "Yes, that old bog. Why?" Candice jumped in. "Because that's likely where the entity is linked. A woman drowned her children there over a century ago. We believe her spirit might be the one harassing Katherine." Sheriff Dalton exhaled. "I can't say I fully understand, but after seeing those things you pointed out, the footprints that just stopped, the way the doors were still locked, let's just say I'm open to suggestions. The plan?" Katherine squared her shoulders. "I want to go to the old pond. If her body was there, maybe we can do something. Lay her to rest, or tell her she's not welcome to hurt us. Father David, perhaps you can perform a blessing or exorcism or whatever is appropriate." Father David held up a silver crucifix and a small vial. "I brought holy water and will certainly do what I can. We may say some prayers, ask for God's protection and for the spirit to find peace, and if it will not, to banish it." Deputy Foster had filled in the sheriff on the night's events, so aside from a few disbelieving headshakes, Dalton was treating it seriously. "We'll all go together then. Safety in numbers, I guess. And Foster, stay sharp." They trudged around the side of the house, past the barn and toward the tree line at the rear of the property. The grass grew taller here, and the ground gently sloped downward. An old barbed wire fence marked the back boundary. Beyond it lay a patch of boggy ground filled with cattails and thorny shrubs. In spring it probably held water, but now in late summer it was mostly mud and stagnant puddles. A faint odour of decay emanated from it, the smell of marsh gases and rotting vegetation. It was the same sickly sweet smell that had clung to the ghost. Katherine's heart thudded as they approached the edge of the pond depression. It was ringed by several gnarled willow trees, their branches hanging limp like dishevelled hair. One tree had a thick limb that extended out over the bog, and from it hung some tattered rope, perhaps remnants of an old swing or line, but it gave the eerie impression of a noose silhouetted against the grey sky. As they drew nearer, the breeze died down, leaving the air heavy and still. A few fat black dragonflies hovered and darted up above the pooled water. "Is this the spot in the article?" Dalton asked quietly. Candice nodded. "Likely, yes. Blackwood Pond, or what's left of it." Father David moved to the bank of the bog and began softly reciting a psalm, sprinkling holy water onto the ground and the tree roots. Deputy Foster and Sheriff Dalton stood on either side of Katherine and Candace, guns not exactly aimed but at the ready. It felt almost absurd, armed men facing off against what was essentially a patch of mud and memory. But they all sensed it, the charged atmosphere, as if the land itself was watching them. Katherine stepped forward, holding up her crucifix necklace and also the wooden cross Candace had lent her. She had tucked it in her pocket. Her voice trembled, but she called out, "Eliza Ward, we know who you are. We know your pain. But you cannot have my family. You can't have me or my children." Her words echoed faintly among the willows. For a moment there was nothing but Father David's low prayers and the buzz of an insect. Then a ripple disturbed one of the puddles. Katherine froze, eyes locked on the expanding circles in the water. There was no wind. Another puddle rippled as if something had dropped into it. Then another. Candace grabbed Katherine's arm. "Look," she whispered, pointing. On the far side of the bog, about 20 feet away, something was rising out of the mud. At first it looked like a dark shape, covered in sludge, emerging slowly. Then, with a horrifying clarity, Katherine recognized the form. A woman's figure, bent and contorted, pulling itself up by clumps of marsh grass. As it straightened, the mud fell away in chunks, revealing a soaked black garment and a veil clinging to a gaunt face. The woman in black stood in the centre of the old pond, where the water likely was deepest in ages past, but she stood on solid ground, as if the muck held her up. Her head tilted until it was almost at a right angle, those awful pale eyes fixing on the assembled group. Despite it being morning, a darkness seemed to cling to her, a shadow that defied the daylight. "Dear God," the young deputy breathed, fumbling to make a sign of the cross. Sheriff Dalton looked like he might be sick, but he held his ground, gun raised instinctively. Candace stifled a cry and stepped behind Katherine, though she kept one hand on her friend's shoulder. Father David turned, raising his crucifix. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit," he began, voice loud and firm. He started to walk toward the bog. Eliza, for Katherine was sure it was she, reacted with a sudden, inhuman shriek, recognizable as the same she'd heard the night before when the ghost was enraged. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, causing the men to wince and Candace to clap hands over her ears. Father David staggered but continued forward, reciting a Latin exorcism prayer now. "Exorcismus te, omnis immundus spiritus." The ghostly woman moved. She didn't walk. She glided across the surface of the bog, the hem of her dress trailing, leaving no footprints, only dead, withered plants in her wake. She was charging directly at Katherine, ignoring Father David completely. The speed at which she crossed the distance was startling. "Stop her," Sheriff Dalton yelled. He and Foster both fired their guns. The gunshots cracked the morning air. Mud and dirty water splashed as bullets hit the bog, but the woman was unaffected. In seconds, she was mere feet from Katherine, at the edge of the pond nearest them. Katherine held up the crucifix, fear threatening to consume her. The ghost halted abruptly, as if hitting an invisible barrier. She hissed at the sight of the holy symbol, her veiled face looming. Now in full light, Katherine could see every gruesome detail through the thin, wet veil. The hollow eye sockets glowing faintly, the stretched grin of bluish lips, the patches of skin where rot exposed bone. And that smell, foul, wet decay, assaulted them. Candace gagged behind her. Father David rushed to Katherine's side, holding the crucifix high and boldly splashing holy water toward the phantom. Droplets struck the black gown and sizzled as if on a hot pan. The woman in black recoiled with a screech that rattled the leaves. "For the love of God, leave this family be," Father David commanded. "Eliza Ward, go to your rest. Your family awaits you beyond, but you shall not harm the living any more." Eliza's form writhed, the outline of her body flickering between solid and misty like a faulty projection. For a moment, Katherine thought it might be working. The ghost started to shrink back toward the bog, arms flailing as if pushed by an invisible force. Father David advanced, pressing the advantage, voice rising in a powerful litany of prayers. The deputies stepped forward too, hopeful. Candace squeezed Katherine's hand, a glimmer of relief on her face. But then the ghost changed tactics. Instead of retreating further, Eliza let out a moan, a heart-rending, sorrowful wail that crescendoed into an ear-splitting scream. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt, vibrating in their bones. Katherine nearly dropped the crucifix as her vision swam with pain. Father David faltered mid-prayer, doubling over as if struck in the gut. The sheriff shouted, "Hold on," but his voice was drowned out. Foster grabbed his ears, blood trickling from one where the eardrum likely ruptured. Candace, beside Katherine, slumped to her knees, crying out. Katherine's own skull felt like it would split, but through sheer will she kept her focus on the phantom. Eliza's scream stopped as abruptly as it began, leaving a dreadful silence. In that silence, the ghost looked directly at Katherine. "Mother to mother," a garbled voice gurgled from the spectre. It was impossible, like hearing someone speak underwater, but Katherine understood it in her mind more than by ear. "You know my pain." Katherine's heart thudded. Was it communicating? "I'm sorry for what happened to you," she found herself saying, panting, "but I will never do what you did, and I won't let you take my children." Eliza's head twitched. From beneath the veil came a wet, choking sob. Then suddenly Eliza rushed forward again, straight at Katherine. Father David, recovering, thrust himself in front, brandishing the crucifix inches from the ghost's face. She halted, but her arms shot out from beneath her tattered shawl. Before anyone could react, her bony, soaked hand plunged straight through Father David's chest. The old clergyman gasped, eyes going wide. For a second it looked unreal, her limb simply penetrating his torso like a ghostly spear. Then his face contorted in agony. Eliza's hand emerged from his back, clutching something, his crucifix chain now snapped and covered in viscous slime. With a vicious yank, she pulled her arm out, and Father David collapsed to the ground with a strangled cry, clutching his chest where an ugly, livid mark was spreading on his skin. "No," Foster yelled, firing again uselessly. Sheriff Dalton rushed to drag Father David away from the ghost's reach. Candace crawled back, screaming in horror. The ghost turned back to Katherine, tilting her head almost curiously. Her hand still held Father David's now corrupted crucifix, which dripped with some black fluid. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it aside into the weeds. Katherine realized she stood basically alone in front of Eliza now, as everyone else was either injured or tending to the fallen priest. She had one tool left, Candace's wooden cross. She yanked it from her pocket and thrust it forward. "Eliza, stop! In God's name, stop!" she shouted, voice breaking. Eliza paused, her form quivering. She regarded the simple wooden cross, and a sound emanated from her that might have been laughter or crying. The ghost reached up with her muddy hands and lifted the veil from her face. Katherine felt her sanity fray at what she saw. Eliza Ward's visage was a nightmare of decomposition. The skin was peeling and fish-belly white, the nose half gone, teeth exposed in a rictus grin. But most disturbingly, her eyes were not empty pits as they seemed from afar. They had eyes, sunken and milky, yes, but in them burned a grief and fury so profound that Katherine staggered back a step. Those eyes held her. In them, Katherine saw a flash of images not her own. Children's faces bloated and still beneath dark water, a razor clutched in a trembling hand, a husband's coffin, and a rope swinging from a beam, an entire life destroyed by despair. It was overwhelming. A wave of pity hit Katherine even as fear gnawed at her. "Give them to me," Eliza gurgled. Her mouth didn't move in time with the words, which seemed to vibrate in Katherine's mind like an invading thought. "Give me your children, or take them with you into the water. It has to be, you understand, it's the only way, family together." Her head jerked with each phrase. Katherine's blood ran cold. This spirit wanted her to do as she did, murder her own kids and herself to join the ghosts. It was insane, vile. Yet the pressure of that psychic demand was heavy. For one terrifying moment, Katherine felt the ghost's desire pressing into her will, probing her maternal love and twisting it. A part of her, under that spectral influence, felt the temptation of relief, to escape all this terror and grief by ending it all, to see David again, maybe. But then Julia's and Max's faces filled her mind, alive and innocent, and she snarled through clenched teeth. Never. Eliza's expression contorted in rage. She let out a banshee wail and lunged at Katherine, arms outstretched as if to throttle or grasp her. Katherine held up the wooden cross and began to pray loudly, words tumbling out unplanned. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." The ghost collided with Katherine. Instead of feeling an impact, Katherine felt an icy chill wash through her entire body as Eliza's form passed partly into her. It was like being doused in freezing water. The wooden cross did burn the spirit. Katherine felt the ghost recoil within, causing a sensation like an electric shock through her nerves. Eliza let out a howl of frustration. Her incorporeal form swirled around Katherine, a vortex of black tatters and foul mist. Katherine realized she was at the very edge of the bog now. Her shoes sank in the mud, the cold slime covering them. The ghost was trying to drag her into the pond. She felt a force pulling at her, like dozens of unseen hands tugging her arms and legs toward the center of the marsh. Her feet slid deeper into the muck past her ankles now. "Katherine!" Candace cried, scrambling forward despite her fear. Foster, partially deafened but still standing, saw what was happening and grabbed Katherine's arm, trying to haul her back. He struggled as if fighting an undertow. The sheriff, too, leaving unconscious Father David, joined in, grabbing her other arm. Together they braced and pulled. For an instant, Katherine felt herself being tugged in two directions, her friends versus the ghost. The strain was excruciating. She cried out as pain lanced through her shoulders. The ghost was surprisingly strong, fueled by desperate fury. Eliza manifested again just behind Katherine, arms wrapped around her waist in a grim embrace, wrenching her towards the muddy water. Her face was over Katherine's shoulder, inches from her cheek. Katherine could feel the cold emanating from that deathly countenance, hear the ghastly, gasping breaths. In that critical moment, Katherine did the only thing she could think of. Still gripping the wooden cross in one hand, she plunged downward, aiming blind. The cross drove into the mud at her feet, directly into the spot where Eliza's translucent form anchored into the earth. The effect was immediate and violent. The water around Katherine and the ghost began to bubble and steam, as if a hot iron had been thrust into it. Eliza threw her head back and screamed, a sound not of anger this time, but of agony. Her grip loosened. The deputies yanked Katherine backward with all their might, finally ripping her free of the bog's clutches. Katherine fell onto solid grass, scrambling away as fast as she could on all fours, her clothes splattered with black mud. Candace grabbed her and helped drag her further from the water's edge. Eliza's form writhed where Katherine had been. The wooden cross jutted up from the mud, glowing white-hot in the ghost's spectral vision. It was as if the simple symbol of faith had impaled the shadowy essence of the woman. Eliza staggered, trying to pull away, but some unseen tether held her to that spot. The cross pinned her, and she could not pass it. Father David, having regained consciousness enough to see what was happening, raised a trembling hand from where he lay and mustered the last of his strength to rasp out, "Rest in peace, tormented soul. In the name of Christ, I cast you out." Eliza's form began to disintegrate, her black dress shredded into ribbons of mist, her face contorting in what might have been pain or perhaps a kind of relief. It was hard to tell. She let out one more haunting wail that gradually faded into a soft sobbing. The figure of the woman collapsed into the ground, dissolving into a dark pool of brackish water around the wooden cross. The puddle bubbled, then went still. The stench in the air began to dissipate, the oppressive weight lifting. For a long moment, none of them dared move or speak, all eyes on the bog. The only sound was everyone's ragged breathing and the distant caw of a crow. Katherine was the first to break the silence. Is it over?" Her voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. Deputy Foster cautiously approached the edge, looking at the spot where the cross remained lodged. The water there was clear now, seeping away into the soil. No sign of the woman in black. He picked up a stone and tossed it in. It landed with a plop and sank. Nothing unusual. "I think we got her," Foster said, though he sounded unconvinced, as if expecting the ghoul to pop out again. Sheriff Dalton helped injured Father David sit up. The clergyman was pale and in pain, but a tiny smile came to his lips. "God willing, she's gone," he said between pained breaths. "That poor soul." Katherine slowly got to her feet with Candace's help. Her legs were wobbly and caked in marsh slime. She felt utterly drained, like she'd run for miles. Candace gave her a hug, heedless of the mud. "You did it, Katherine. You stood up to her." Katherine wanted to respond, but her words caught in her throat. Instead, she just held Candace tightly, tears of exhaustion and residual fear sliding down her face. She looked over her friend's shoulder at the bog, where the cross still stood, a simple marker in the mud. "Thank you," she thought. Though whether she directed it to God, Father David, or just the sheer luck of survival, she wasn't sure. They carefully pulled the wooden cross out of the ground. It was charred black, as if burned. Candace brushed mud off it and held it to her chest. "Dad's cross," she murmured, amazed it had such an effect. By some miracle, none of them aside from Father David were seriously hurt. Father David's chest had a ghastly purplish mark, and he needed medical attention, but he insisted on giving a final blessing over the pond before leaving. Sheriff Dalton radioed for an ambulance, half stumbling over how to explain a non-criminal injury at the location. Foster simply said, "Just get one," into the radio. Katherine, Candace, and the deputies limped back to the farmhouse yard. Katherine took one last look back at the swampy grove. It was quiet, unremarkable save for the churned mud. A place of tragedy, past and present. Yet perhaps now the earth could be still again without the restless spirit. She hoped Eliza Ward had finally found peace, or at least could no longer harm anyone. 2 weeks later, the summer sun was shining warmly over the Briar Glen Cemetery. It was a modest graveyard behind the small white church in town. Rows of old headstones stood amid neatly cut grass and late-blooming wildflowers. Under a large oak tree on the northern edge were 3 fresh graves. 2 bore the names of Eliza Ward's children. Their bodies had been exhumed from Blackwood Pond after the events at the farm. With the pond mostly drained, a local search team had uncovered their tiny skeletons where they'd rested for a century. The community, moved by the tale, gave them a proper Catholic burial at last. Between the 2 smaller graves was a larger one, a stone etched with Eliza Ward, 1872-1908. May she find the peace in death that eluded her in life. The decision was made to inter her remains, what could be found, beside her children, in hallowed ground, with prayers that this would lay her spirit to rest forever. Katherine stood at these graves now, Julia and Max on either side of her holding her hands. She had hesitated about bringing the kids, but ultimately thought it important. They needed closure to see that the scary lady was truly gone and maybe understand why it happened. Father David, recovered from his ordeal, had performed the reburial service earlier that morning. Katherine and her friends attended privately. The story given to the general public was that some long-lost remains were found on Katherine's property and were being reburied. Only a handful of people knew the full truth of the haunting. Max looked up at his mother. "She was a bad lady," he said, still fearful. Katherine squeezed his little hand. "She was a very sad lady who did terrible things, but she can't hurt anyone now." Julia leaned her head against Katherine's arm. "I feel sorry for her," she admitted softly. "Is that wrong?" Katherine shook her head. "No, sweetie, it's not wrong. She went through something very painful, but she made the wrong choices." Her voice gained a steely edge, "and I'm so grateful I didn't let her make me do the same." They placed a trio of white lilies on the graves, a symbol of peace and forgiveness. Katherine wasn't sure if she forgave Eliza for the terror and harm, but she wanted to let go of the bitterness. Holding on to hate, after all, is what perhaps trapped Eliza's soul in the first place. She uttered a quiet prayer for the dead woman and her children, then turned to her own. "Come on, kids," she said gently. "Let's go home." Candace and Roy, who had hung back respectfully near the church, walked with them to the parking lot. The afternoon was bright, cicadas buzzing in the trees. It felt almost normal. Katherine's farmhouse had since been cleaned up, and with the spiritual threat seemingly gone, she and the kids had moved back in. The first few nights had been tense, but gradually the fear subsided. They even got a new puppy, a rambunctious mutt, both as a comforting presence and a sort of early warning system, though he mostly warned of rabbits in the garden. As they reached the cars, Julia and Max ran ahead to pet the puppy through the open window. Candace hugged Katherine. "You sure you don't want to stay with us tonight?" "It's Friday. We could have a sleepover and movie marathon," she teased lightly. Katherine smiled. Candace had scarcely left her side since the incident, ever protective. "We'll be okay. I think being at home is good for us now, but we'll come by for dinner this weekend, I promise." Roy clapped Katherine on the shoulder. "You know we're always a call away. Don't hesitate if you feel anything weird." "I won't," Katherine said. "But honestly, it's been quiet, truly quiet." She drew in a deep breath of summer air. For the first time in a long time, I feel safe." They said their goodbyes, and Katherine loaded the kids into her car, the puppy jumping onto Max's lap. As she drove out of the cemetery, she took one last glance in the rearview mirror at the 3 new graves under the oak. Sunlight filtered down in gentle rays upon them. It looked peaceful. The drive home was filled with the sound of Max playing with the dog and Julia fiddling with the radio until she found a station playing one of David's favourite songs, an old country tune. Instead of bringing sadness, it made Katherine smile, remembering him fondly. They sang along a little off-key. Turning down the familiar dirt lane to her farmhouse, Katherine felt a surge of emotion. This was the place David had hoped would be their family haven. For a while, after his death, it had become a place of sorrow and then fear. Katherine took a final glance across her sunlit property, then turned and went inside, shutting the door behind her. In the silvery reflection of the glass window on the door, for just a heartbeat, it was not Katherine's face that stared back. Instead, a gaunt woman in a dripping black veil gazed from within the glass, a cold, hungry smile on her lips. In a blink, the reflection was normal again. Just Katherine's tired but hopeful face. Unaware of the fleeting apparition, Katherine slid the deadbolt closed. As she walked toward the kitchen where her children waited, she found herself humming a soft lullaby under her breath. The melody was an old, mournful tune that she did not recognize, a song she had never learned, yet somehow knew by heart. Julia and Max fell quiet, listening curiously as their mother's gentle humming carried through the house. Up on the wall, a family photograph subtly tilted without anyone noticing, as if disturbed by an unseen hand. And outside on the lawn the breeze picked up once more, whispering through the grass the words that no one inside could hear. Today's the day. Katherine thought the nightmare had ended, that her family was finally free from the woman in black's grasp. But some hauntings don't end. They linger, waiting, whispering through the cracks of ordinary life. In the stillness of her farmhouse, a familiar shadow watches, patient as ever. She lost her husband to fate. Now something wants her children, and it won't take no for an answer.
Every story has an end, but here the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.